So the first thing I actually want to say is congratulations to you because I know you recently got an NSF Career Award. So congratulations on that. I'm sure that was a huge weight off your shoulders to get that over the line. Um, I know those can be, well, securing funding and grants can be extremely stressful nowadays.
Mhm.
I wouldn't really know. I'm not obviously a professor, but I know kind of hearing secondhand from my advisor and within the community it can be difficult. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, but Brett is doing great too, though. I
Yeah,
mean,
he is. um, but maybe we'll touch upon this later on. But funding is quite a difficult game to play. Definitely
definitely.
gotta hit the right notes. Um, Making sure that you're, even though you want to have a, let's say, fundamental understanding of the science, sometimes you have to be a little bit more applicable in order to secure those funding and hit those words like sustainability, green, and all those kind of things. But anyway, that's a conversation for later.
Mhm.
But today I'm joined by Professor Tai-Yen Chen, who is a professor here at the University of Houston, kind of in the physical chemistry department area, but really in chemical biology. Certainly well out of my area of expertise. So I'm very excited to talk about his research today. It's going to be super fun. But figured we obviously start with kind of your general background. And I know we're talking a little bit beforehand, and I know you're from Taiwan. And please correct me. I'm gonna butcher these. Look, my Irish and German heritage can't really pronounce a lot of these Asian, uh, let's say, names. But I know you went to Tsing-Hua University in Houston, Hsinchu, Taiwan, which is in the northwest region. But I'll kind of let you and give a little bit of background about yourself.
Sure. You're actually doing it great. So
I
I just came
appreciate
back
it.
from, yeah, I just came back from Taiwan, as you know. Yeah. So I was actually, uh, I was actually originally born at the east side of Taiwan. It's actually a very small town. So I'm a kid of a farmer. So you know, when I growing up, I did not expect myself eventually end up at the US being a professor here.
Mm.
So it's kind of like a very interesting trajectories of my life. Yeah. So being you know, a son of a farmer, I mean, the things I do the most when I was young is actually, working in the rice field. We just
Yeah.
play around, and then the things I do most is just working with my parents, and then trying to enjoy the natures actually in that specific area. The town is actually surrounded by mountains. Yeah,
Mm.
so I typically go hiking with my parents and with my friends. And then when I grow up, I decide I'm doing okay with my study when I was young, and then eventually they have this very nice plan. They actually encourage these kids from all this rural area, go to the big cities, and then get some higher education. That's how I
Yeah.
actually get into this Tsinghua University, which is actually one of the best university in Taiwan. Yeah, so after that, like, okay, I found that the chemistry is interesting, and then start diving into all this field, and then just follow along. Eventually, I actually study abroad in the US. Yeah, so very short introduction of my life
Yeah.
so far.
Sure. I was gonna say because I was looking into Taiwan a little bit because I needed a little bit geographical perspective. I wanted to see how large it is. It's about twice the size of New Jersey. So I'm from the Northeast,
Hmm.
so I have a good perspective of how big New Jersey is. So,
Hmm.
um, relatively small country. I mean, you can kind of get. I know, like, let's say width wise, it's only about 20, 30 miles. So you really can get like from east to west pretty quickly,
Yeah,
which is I thought was pretty cool.
yeah.
Um,
It's actually take much longer than you thought, though, because we have mountains everywhere.
yeah, mountains.
Yeah, so those things actually going to slow you down so much.
Well,
Hmm.
that's pretty interesting though because I know I mean like you said, at least from what I understand the eastern coast is more rural areas, but then like the western coast might be is more definitely more city like
Hmm.
and then divided by a mountain. So it's pretty cool that you go from like let's say the urban cities to the west side. You have to cross these mountains and then get over to the rural east side. It's kind of interesting. Um,
Yeah, it's also like I guess the things I guess my personal trajectory is actually out of my parents' expectations
mm,
because we are all farmers. Well,
yeah.
so that's actually the thing that they only know how to grow crops. That's the only thing they know, right? So they never actually expect me to like become a teacher, nonetheless the
Yeah.
professor. Yeah, so they're actually quite surprised that eventually I end up at the US. But I think that they are actually the most important thing that keep me going. Yeah, even though
Yeah,
they
for sure.
don't know what I'm doing, they will just say, okay, Tai-Yen, just go ahead. You have our full support. Yeah, so
Yeah.
those are the things that actually supports me and keep me going. Yeah, and then eventually I come up to this position that I really like. I really enjoy the life.
So I think like I assume then your parents were also like they didn't. I assume they didn't go through higher education. They kind of grew up in the rural area as
Correct.
well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they
So
never know, they have no idea what I'm doing now.
yeah,
So
fair
every
enough.
time they see my, like sometimes when we got this, for example, the NS Career Award,
Hmm.
right? We typically got interviewed by, for example, by the university, right? So we need to actually talk
Hmm.
about like what are the things we actually write, and then why we actually got all these fundings and what is this funding for. So every time I show them all this news, they don't know all these details. But they're just happy, right? They know I'm
Yeah.
doing something meaningful. Yeah, so they're so supportive that no matter what I decide, they will just say, just go ahead. No, they
Yeah,
will actually
that's
support
great.
my plan. So that's actually one of the best things that I so far in my life, say.
So I guess what I'm curious about is how did that? I don't know if it was like a progressive, but how did that, or I'd say not progressive, progression. When you first were interested in, let's say, the STEM fields in general, like, did you tell them like, hey, I really want to pursue an education? You kind of want to leave world? Like, how'd that go?
Yeah, I remember that I actually left my family quite early. So when I actually
Hmm.
going to my high school, I actually go to the dorm. I didn't actually live with my family anymore. So back to that
Hmm.
time, I was just 15. Yeah.
Oh wow.
So back to that time, I told my mother that, Mom, I want to actually go to this high school, but it's actually far away from our home. It's kind of like 1.5 hour drive from my home to the high
Yeah.
school. Yeah. So. But back to that time, when you actually take all these exams, if you pass the bar, then you can actually go to the high school. So she's actually worried me so much. She say, but the bar test is actually so difficult. I mean, I don't want you to actually burn yourself, okay, reading the books all day long. Okay, you lost yourself. Then I told my mom, I feel like those bar is actually not that difficult for me. I feel like I'm doing okay for my junior high school, so I'm actually perform pretty well. So eventually she just told me, okay, so do whatever you want. I mean, if you want, if that's your decision, you know, you have our support. Yeah, so that's actually time I start to feel like, okay, I'm not afraid of going out. Okay, I
Yeah.
don't feel I'm alone, even though I'm actually physically alone. I left my family quite early. Yeah, but that's actually, mentally I feel like I'm quite strong because all this family support.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's definitely always really good to have. I was you know, in a similar situation where my parents, I mean, only my mom got like a bachelor's degree. My dad didn't really go to school, but I
Hmm.
went to university about 30 minutes away. So I told him I was very serious about getting this STEM degree. So I understand where that pursuit of education. I understand that, and you know, it's funny because they don't really know what I'm talking about when I talk to you about these kind of things, but they're still always super supportive, and there's always something really just really nice about that, you know, and they just will always support you. That's super nice. So that's really lovely to hear. Um,
I think that's
but
actually one of the best things that you can actually have. The family is
yeah,
actually one of the core that allow you to have all this confidence in mind, right? You know you are not alone, and then you know you are going to have someone, back you up, right?
yeah,
So I never actually feel afraid to try something new, right? For example,
yeah,
I study abroad. This kind of things is out of their imagination,
mm,
right? And I decide to do so because I know uh, this first is actually a good thing for myself. Second,
mm-hmm.
I feel like if I can achieve all these things they never seen, I also trying to expand their horizon too. Yeah, so bring some new experience to their life is something I'm also enjoyed.
Something that I found, at least for me personally, I found that actually like moving far away, because like I mentioned, like I'm from originally from Philadelphia, so I'm a
Mm-hmm.
4 hour plane ride to
Mm-hmm.
Houston. But I oddly like got closer to my family when I moved far away, because like I appreciated things while I was home, and I
Mm-hmm.
feel like now I'm kind of close to them because I call them on a weekly basis and stuff like that. We're always
Yeah.
caught up. So I found that really odd. Like when I moved away, I actually got closer in that kind of sense. And when I see them, let's say on vacation, I spend a lot more intimate time with them. So I thought that was really interesting. Um,
Yeah.
but on the university though, so I know you kind of went into the inorganic division, and
Yes.
bachelor's. You kind of got your master's degree there as well. What I'm curious about is one is, well, first of all, kind of your initial interest in chemistry in general. Like what was it about chemistry as opposed to maybe other fields, and then your general experience at university studying inorganic chemistry.
Yeah. So I guess when I was young, I was actually very naive. Okay, I actually don't know what I want to do. Okay,
Fair
so
enough.
when in high school is actually the first time I found chemistry interesting. Okay, so we have this chemistry teachers. Okay, by himself, he's actually not very good chemistry teacher at all. Okay, I feel like he's actually lack fundamental understanding of some of the chemistry concepts. Okay, but he is actually a teacher. I mean, the way he teaches is actually fun. Yeah, so that kind of triggers me. Okay, so this is actually a very interesting courses. Okay, and then apparently the teacher doesn't really know everything. Okay,
Yeah.
this actually stimulated myself to actually read a lot more chemistry textbook myself. Okay, so it's kind of like a weird combination, but the end result is that I spent quite a lot of time reading the textbook myself, and then start to find all this chemistry concept is actually quite interesting. Yeah,
Mm.
and then I don't, and the other thing is actually I feel like I don't need to spend too much effort. That I can actually easily understand those concepts. How like you have the gene to actually understand certain things more easy than others. Right?
Yeah.
So when I actually decide to go to college, then I feel like, hey, if I want to pick something to do in the future, why not pick something I'm really good at? Yeah, so that's actually how I decide. Okay, I want to pick chemistry as my major. So there we go. And then eventually
That's
I
about
go to the
sometimes.
college.
Yeah, sometimes it's that leap of faith. I feel like most people I talk, well, first of all, to expect a, let's say, 17, 18-year-old to know what they want to do for the rest of life is, first of all, sometimes can lead to disasters, but also it's like you got to just take a leap of faith and try something.
Definitely.
Um, but I know during your time there, you also did, you worked under Chien-Hong Cheng.
Hmm.
Did you do any like undergraduate research your time there, or did you just
Yes,
kind
I
of do
did.
the?
I
Okay,
did.
what'd you do there?
So the things I did most, okay, so the reason I actually eventually do the master over there is because I do this undergraduate research with him.
Hmm.
And then he is actually, I mean, his research lab have two directions. One is about this catalysis mechanism for the, I think it's platinum complexes.
Mm.
And the other direction is actually more applications. It's about this organic light emitting diode, the OLED applications. So what it does is actually synthesize all this iridium complex. And then I think back to that time, the things we are focused the most is either the red fluorophore or the blue fluorophore, two two ends of your visible spectrum. Yeah. So I think back to that time, I'm very proud of myself because I can actually synthesize all those, complex, and
Mm.
then I can actually, bring those things to measure this proton NR, and then solve all this structure myself. Right? Back to that time, that's actually things I enjoy the most. Okay, so we
Yeah.
always compete who can actually do the most NR spectrons within 30 minutes, which is actually the time for like every reservation is actually 30 minutes. Yeah. So, and how to actually uh, solve all the chemical structure of your complex from all these peaks, NR
Right.
peaks. So those are the things I enjoy the most when I get started. Okay. So I do the things for maybe 2.5 years, 3 years. Yeah. And then at the later stage of my stay for my master degree, I start to once you have all these complex synthesized, right? You want to actually characterize its physical property. So I start to actually work with some other professors in our department, and then measure the lifetime of the fluorescence, right? And then, but it's actually not fluorescence because it's iridium complex. The things you actually observe, the emission from those complexes actually phosphorescence.
Mm.
So I start to realize that, okay, some of the, even though it looks just like light, right? So it actually have different meanings. Yeah, and then that is the time I start to feel, okay, these physical properties are actually quite interesting, right? And then we learn all these instrumentations in the analytical chemistry courses, right? And I start to actually have the chance to actually get in touch with all these instruments. Then I found it's actually quite amazing actually how human can actually create all this methodology to really actually understand something basic invisible, right?
Right.
So that's actually time I start to have some interest in my mind that if I have a chance to actually go further, maybe I will actually switch from inorganic chemistry to the physical chemistry. Okay,
Mm.
expand my understandings in the chemistry field in general. Yeah, so that is actually the reason, okay, why I actually go to the graduate school.
Yeah.
I like change my field from inorganic chemistry to ultra fast spectroscopy. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's some things. That's the transitions that I have back to the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is probably a natural segue then into because you did your PhD at Texas A&M. But before we get there, I mean, well, then how did that conversation go with your parents? You're like, you know what, I'm gonna leave Taiwan and go to Texas. How did that? Surely that was like really eye opening, or um,
Yeah, so I guess that's actually another story for that because back to that time, right? So I synthesized all these iridium complex, and we are actually the
okay.
very early ones who actually step into the OLED field, right? So that is actually back to 2002, 2002
Hmm.
to 2004. Back to that time, the OLED field is actually still very immature. It's just beginning.
Yeah.
So we are actually the first few lab who actually can synthesize those good materials.
Oh
So we
wow.
actually work with the companies actually quite often. We actually collaborate with actually two companies in Taiwan whose main business is actually about manufacture all this OLED display. Yeah. So by the time I'm going to graduate, okay, I already get many offers from. I actually get offers from both companies. Yeah.
Yeah.
So back to that time, okay, OLED is actually looks very promising industry, right? So you can expect to actually earn good amount of money back to that time. Yeah,
Still is
but
honestly.
yeah, but the other thing that actually happened happened at the same time is that okay, some of my very good friends, okay, they just come to me and then tell me that at Tai-Yen we decide to actually study abroad. We want to actually
Hmm.
do the same thing. Yeah, so I think about those things, right? And then plus my master advisor also asked me, do I want to do a PhD, okay, in his lab, right? So I think that's actually time I start to think about more serious about, okay, what I should do after the master. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel
You're at a
like, okay, if
crossroads.
yeah, so that is actually, I guess, the one of the biggest decisions that I made back to that time that totally changed my life.
Hmm.
So I guess go to industry, the benefit is that, okay, I can immediately actually have a good financial support. I can actually improve my parents' financial situation. Yeah, they don't need to actually work so hard. Yeah, so that's actually the upsides, right? But the downside is
Yeah.
actually I lost my opportunity to actually improve my knowledge. I kind of like lost the opportunity to actually still do the things that I enjoy the most, which is research. Right.
Yeah.
So I want to actually really learn how nature works, right? So plus my friends actually tell me, hey, Tai-Yen, and we feel like you should go out. Okay. So I actually struggle quite a bit. Okay. In my in my personal life for my undergraduate study, okay, I'm not those kind of like top student in the very beginning. Yeah, so in the first 2 years, I spent all my time trying to enjoy myself, trying to enjoy the time I have with my friends. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I barely passed my Gen Chem 1, Gen Chem 2. Yeah, so I still remember we have 60 kids in my class. I rank 56. Back to that time. So, but little things actually. So I actually have a very serious conversation with my parents when I finished my first year in the college. Yeah, because they never actually worry about my performance. Yeah,
Mm.
but suddenly they see that okay, I'm doing pretty much at the bottom of my class. So they come to me. Of course, they did not say much. Okay, they just ask me, okay, Tai-Yen, do you actually encounter some like problems like studying in the college? Yeah, and I'm embarrassed because I know I did not do my best. Yeah, I know I do poorly simply because I just having too much fun. Okay.
Yep.
So after 2 years of those kind of life, and then my parents still very supportive, so I feel guilty myself. And I really kind of think about, okay, I spent 2 years, okay, playing around, and I do have a lot of fun. I actually get to know a lot of people. I went to a lot of different places. I feel like, okay, I have enough. I should actually go back and focus on my future. Yeah, so in my third year, junior and senior years. Okay, so I really actually work really hard. Okay, I pretty much actually live in the library. Yeah, I read all day long.
Hey.
Yeah, so I think my grade is kind of like okay at the very bottom in the first 2 years, come to a very
Yep.
top in the very last 2 years. Yeah, and I
That's really
still
cool.
remember when I did my master, I graduated with I think the first place in my class in the year.
Hey.
So it's kind of like a really huge change, right?
Yeah.
So, and that is actually a time I start to think about if my friend they decide to actually study abroad, why shouldn't I? Right? So I know I can
Hmm.
do it. Yeah.
Right.
So I give myself a chance back to that time. I told myself, okay, I'm going to apply a few school. Okay. If I get it, I will study abroad. If I don't, then I go to industry to improve, my parents' financial situations. Yeah. So I think I apply probably 10 schools.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then I only get one over. Yeah. So that one is actually Texas A&M. So I got the offer actually quite early. Then I decide, okay, why not? Let's give it a try. So I go back home, tell my parents that, okay, mom, dad, I get admissions and go to US. Yeah. And then how do you think? Yeah. So of course they don't know anything. Yeah, this is actually our player life experience. But they just say, okay, Taiyan, we are actually very happy for you. Let's go ahead and do it. Yeah, so that's
Yeah,
how
it's
things
very
happen. Hmm.
that's really I feel like that's actually a story of a lot of students where they really first 2 years were kind of goofing around, and then sometimes it's like I mean in your situation your parents didn't really know much, so you felt guilty, so you had that own guilt to kind of pick it up yourself. Um, but they ended up turning it around. And I think that goes to show you like I mean a lot of students. I think it's interesting though because you were interested fundamentally, let's say in the chemistry, let's say if at a fundamental level, you may not have been performing well in the classroom, but I feel like I wonder what percentage of students, let's say even like worldwide, maybe like get discouraged by their Gen Chem scores and they
Mhm.
think that chemistry is like not for them. I think I'd be curious to know like what that number is because surely it's high. I mean, I remember my Gen Chem class, we must have you're freshmen in colleges. The freshmen are gonna be freshmen, like they're out partying, whatever. Um, but we lost half the class. Like we had a 60 student class, and we lost like 30 students at the last two, first month or so. And
Mhm.
so whether obviously the adjustment of college, but it's like I'm curious to know like how many of them actually though would have actually excelled in in any chemistry degree, but
hmm I
because
don't have a
they
good number for you, but my feeling is that the reason I can come back strong, there are
mm,
actually a few factors. First, I have good family support. That's one. Second is actually I have good friends. Yeah.
yeah.
So I know, I mean, when I was playing around, some of my close friends, they actually tell me that, okay, it's about time that we should actually go back and study harder. Yeah. And then I met my undergraduate research advisor, Zheng, right? So he is actually the person who actually also provide me very valuable insights. Yeah, he actually
Mm,
shared with me about like how he think about chemistry and then how he think about higher education, right? And then somehow he has a very strong belief in me that I can do great. Yeah, so I guess after being a professor, when looking back, I really feel like at some moment in your life, you need someone to help you just a little bit. They can keep you going. Yeah,
right.
so we all need mentors, right? So those mentors ex super valuable to our life, I would say. Yeah, so looking back, I feel like at every single stage in my life, somehow I always encounter someone who can bring me this so important concept. They can actually turn my life around. That I know, okay, what I should do to actually improve my performance, to improve uh, my future directions. Yeah.
Yeah.
So those things, of course, at this moment, back to that time, I never actually see all these things, right? It just happened naturally to me. So I always told my student I'm the lucky one who always encounter some really good people that allow me to improve myself. Yeah. So so then right now I actually always trying to actually tell my students, okay, how you should actually think about your life. Okay, what are the important things that you should actually pay attention to, right?
Mm,
So so I actually spend quite some time, okay, every time I take some either undergraduate or graduate students, we talk about all these things a lot. Yeah, so it's not just about research, it's more about like how you actually plan for your personal life. Yeah. Those also something I feel like I got so much help from my helpers previously, right? So right
yeah.
now I kind of get to this stage and then I'm more than happy to share my experience to those people who's willing to listen to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, um, that's definitely very, very good, I think, because especially I think in an academic sense, because I feel like there's so much pressure for graduate students and even undergraduates, honestly, to get graduate and get the research in, and it's like they lose sight of what's actually important. Like one, your physical, mental, and emotional health is one.
hmm Yeah.
You can't do any chemistry unless those three things are in order. You really just
Yeah.
can't. You can't do anything of those three, anything, right? So,
Yes. Yes.
um,
So I was
and making
told my
sure you,
student, yeah, so all the training you got is preparing you to handle whatever question you're going to encounter for your future life, right?
yeah,
So if you can think about you're actually just playing a training game, okay, no matter what subject you're actually looking at, okay, let's actually also always have a fundamental framework behind it, right? And the fundamental is actually first, you want to actually identify the questions, right? You want to define your questions. And then once you define your question, you want to actually come up with some solutions, right? And then you're, of course, you're going to form in some hypothesis to test, okay, whether this is going to work or not, right? So,
mm,
and then eventually you find a solution and then address the question they encounter. Yeah. All this framework is actually things, is actually encoded in all our academia trainings, right? We always, I mean, in academia, we always trying to solve certain problems, right? Scientific problems specifically, right? But the things you do has nothing different with how you handle the future you're going to the problem you're going to encounter in your future.
right,
So I think the training in the PhD program is very valuable because you practice this framework so many times, right? So if you are really become a PhD, then you should be able to actually apply all this philosophy to handle whatever question you're going to encounter in the future. Yeah.
Mm.
So it doesn't
Yeah,
matter
it's
what
a
you actually study, right?
yeah,
But the framework is actually always the same. Yeah. So that's why I
yeah.
always tell my students, you should actually do your best to really master all these skills. Okay. Because
Mm.
once you mastered it, you use it for good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely a really good philosophy, and somebody hopefully, that sort of philosophy gets echoed in, across all academia, I think, because it's super important. But kind of moving back then into, you left Taiwan and went into to Texas.
Texas A&M. Yeah.
I am very curious. First, I mean, I know Texas A&M has a really great chemistry program in general.
Mhm.
Um, but kind of curious to hear from you. One, why A&M, and your and how your experience was there and the research that you conducted there.
Mm-hmm. So why A&M? Because that's actually the only school that gave me the admission.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
Simple,
and that is
simple
actually the best
answer.
school I applied though. So I applied
Hmm.
actually 10 schools, but A&M is actually a top ranked one. Yeah, so and they give me admission so early. So I guess I'm fine with that. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
can't
then
really
back
say
to
no
that
to
time, I
that.
don't have good knowledge about like, okay, which school is actually much better than the others, right? And then I don't think I speak English well enough, so I lack of confidence to apply even higher rank school. Yeah,
Sure.
so when I look into all these programs in Yang, I found it's actually a good program, and then professors look actually quite nice, right? So I guess I just follow the flow. I don't have too much thought. Yeah, like I say, I don't know much, right? When I was young, I don't really know much. Yeah, but I guess I just follow the flow, and then that's how I actually end up at Texas A&M. And then when I go to A&M, I decide to, I think back to that time, neuroscience is actually very popular.
Hmm.
And then I also want to do some spectroscopy.
Right.
So I decided to actually join Hee Son's lab, who is actually an expert using this ultra-fast spectroscopy to study all these magnetic nanoparticle properties. Yeah, so that's how it happens. I actually the first graduate student of his. Yeah, he just
Oh
joined
wow.
Texas A&M. Yeah, so I'm his actual first graduate student. So
I think real quick, I think that's probably one of the most ideal situations ever to be like one of the PI's like very first students because you have enough time. Like it takes 5 6 years to get the tenure. So if you're like one of the very first students, you're kind of guaranteed. Let's say, um, I mean, one you get a lot of one-on-one time, obviously, because I assume most PIs are going to be in the lab, kind of
mhm.
writing grants, but also like getting the research in. So you get a lot of one-on-one time, but also you're kind of guaranteed those 5 6 years for them to get tenured for you to graduate. So that's really cool.
Yeah, but it's also a lot of pressure, right? Because
That is true.
as a
But
assistant professor, he pretty much actually stay in the lab for all day long, right? So I remember that the working hour per week is actually crazy.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, 60 to 70 hours per week. Yeah, so it's
well,
actually a lot of fun, but it's also very tiring too. You actually really devoted yourself in that environment. Yeah, and to me it is okay because I enjoy the things I'm doing. Yeah,
yeah,
I don't consider it is a burden because I feel like I am learning. Yeah, so my personality is that if I realize that all my efforts can actually make myself a better me in the future, I'm willing to do it. Yeah. So back to that time is actually, I have good relationship with my PhD advisor, right? We have good like he's actually a good mentor, but not everybody can actually accept that intensive schedule. right? But
Mm.
I'm the one I feel like it's okay. Yeah, and then my friends always call me I'm the golden kid in the lab, right? So, every time the professor want to actually, do something, I mean, I'm the first kid, who is willing to
Yeah.
respond. Yeah, who is actually willing to provide help, right? So I think that's also the reason why by the time I'm going to graduate, I'm looking for a postdoc position. He's actually the one who pushed me the most. Yeah, so
Mm.
he's actually trying to find a postdoc position for me too.
I'm
Yeah.
sure in some, and you could definitely comment on this. I feel like, obviously your new PI was new to the department. He's got to get, tenured in results. So he's also in the lab working hard too. So I'm sure that's kind of like, yeah, you were working really, really hard. Don't get me wrong. But it
Hmm.
was almost like reassuring that he was like there too. Like he's along the way with you. Like not, I don't know. I don't know how, that's how I assumed it was.
Yes, for the
Yeah.
first 2 years though. So
First two
when
years,
I
fair
actually
enough.
go
Yeah.
into my third year, he kind of like feel like I'm actually been trained enough. I can actually
Yeah.
take care of most of, those routine work by myself. So I become the one who actually start to train all the other members in the lab. Yeah.
That's a really
So
cool role.
yeah. So I actually start to actually doing all these training things very early. Yeah. I actually like to talk to my friends, right? Because I know that not everybody enjoy the PhD uh, process. Yeah. Actually, most of them they don't. Yeah. And I'm some kids who actually I feel like I'm lucky enough that I truly enjoy my experience being a PhD and a postdoc in both
Yeah.
stages. I feel like I'm the one who can really enjoy these processes. Yeah, and then the main reason I can do that is because I think I encounter a mentor who actually fits me well. Yeah, so every time I have questions, my mentor always can actually give me some insights, how to think about things positively, right?
Mm.
So that I feel like, okay, during this process, I mean, I feel like the biggest problem for all this PhD training is that students sometimes they got confused. They don't know what to do. They don't know what they are pursuing. They don't know. We work so hard about what is this for, right?
Yeah.
So
That's a
they don't
very good
know.
question.
Yeah, so they feel like they are confused, right? I never actually have let those doubt because I know whatever I'm doing now is actually good for me, right? I know what I can do in the future, right?
Right.
But all of things coming from like I have a caring mentors, right? He actually talked to me and then teach me how to think, right? So they always tell me to think positively, which
Right.
is I think is super important for graduate students because under this high pressure environment, right? If there's not someone tells you how to think positively specifically, right? Student is very easy to fall into a situation that they start to feel like okay they are working for nothing, right? And it's very easy to have those negative thoughts happening during this training stage, right? And
Right.
then if it happens, you actually create a feedback loop, and then every day you start to question yourself, right? And then if that happens, they actually put you in a very bad situation. So yeah, but it's also late time, right? So have good mentors, and then when I go to the third year, I still have to talk to more PhD students. Okay, I see those ones who suffers. I also see those ones who is being very successful, right? So by have all those contrast, right? I gradually to realize that okay, this could be a really good thing for some people, but really bad thing for others, right?
Hmm.
It really depends on how you actually think about all these trainings, right? Do you actually have a good mentors along this process that guide you through? If you do, then I think you should be able to actually enjoy this process and then really make yourself improve so much within this 5 years windows.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think. Yeah, you're right. I think a lot of times, especially early on, a lot of students get lost in the. Well, I mean, I said before they get lost in not having enough of the research and the pressure of it. But it's a lot of the PhD is not necessarily about, let's say, the end result. It's about problem solving. It's about, um, you know, it's yeah, I mean, it's problem solving. It's like, can you are what you're dealing with right now? Could you take that and learn from it and then use that somehow in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I
Can
think
you?
many people actually have this definition for judge whether you're actually a good PhD, right? So the
Right.
ultimate actually judgment is actually, can you solve problem independently, right?
Yeah.
Independently is actually the key word, right?
Yeah.
So when you talk about this independently, what it really means is actually when you encounter a problem, can you actually define the problem properly first, right?
Yep.
To define a problem properly requires actually many things. You need to actually do the proper literature search. You need to have good understanding about, okay, what is the real problem, right? You need to actually narrow down the problem to a testable situation, right? All those things need trainings, right? So that is actually always the first stage, right? Once you can actually really define your question properly, okay, then it won't be too difficult to figure out, okay, what are the possible solutions to test, right?
Right.
So you can test your possible solution one, it doesn't work, go to two, go to three, so on and so forth. And eventually you actually can find out what is the answer to your questions, right? So making all these things independently is actually the goal, right? If you can actually do all these trainings, okay, not just technical training, okay, but more importantly is actually the physiologically training, right? So the conceptual training is actually a lot more important, right? But many students they don't see through this layer, right? They actually struggle uh doing all this training in the techniques, right?
Mhm.
So they just get frustrated in all these technical trainings. They focus on something that is uh details. Okay, of course, you need to actually have good understanding of details. Then you can answer some of these higher level questions, right? But some people actually get lost. They never actually finish those details soon enough so that they can actually start to think about things in a higher level. Yeah. So I think if you have good mentors, these two things will actually proceed simultaneously, right? So you know, okay, why you need to actually understand all these technical details, because only after you understand these details, then you can actually reapply them to your higher level thinkings, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't have this higher level thinking in the beginning, you always actually struggle in the technical part, right? Then you feel like, okay, what is this for, right? So it's very easy for students to actually get lost. Yeah, so I do feel like if you have good mentors, it will actually bring out all these higher level thinkings for you very early on, so that you will know, okay, why you want to actually master all these techniques uh, in a short amount of time. Okay, the reason you do that is really that only after you have all these skill sets, then you can just start to think about more important things, right? Yeah, so that's why I feel like I'm lucky enough, right? All my mentors actually they let me know those things very early on. So I never
Yeah.
feel confused, even though I work very hard. Okay, I never feel like it's frustrating because I know the reason I need to actually work so hard to actually get all these things mastered is because only after that I can really do these meaningful thinkings in the
Yeah.
future. Hmm.
And that's I tell students too, like especially new students coming up, like definitely don't necessarily choose the research, choose a good advisor. Like you really need someone that's not gonna be, I would say, don't join a pessimist. Don't, you need someone that's gonna be optimistic and actually will support you. Maybe even someone that'll give you a nice one-on-one time. If they can't, if they're like, really, let's say famous advisor, they have a lot of students. Do they have good postdocs that can teach you? So that's extremely important. So don't necessarily choose the research, choose a good advisor, and I guess by default choose good postdocs too if
Yeah,
they're
so
also in the
I
group as
guess
well.
like this could probably say something I can talk about for another hour. But in general, I do feel like it doesn't really matter what you do, okay,
Yeah.
at the PhD stage. Okay, so and then it is not necessary that everybody go to academia.
Yep.
Okay, so not everybody is actually good can become a good professor. Okay, so when I say my definition of good professor is not just teaching the skills, but more importantly is actually teach students how to think in the long term. right? In other words, okay, you cannot be just an advisor. You need to be a mentor.
Yeah.
Because the mentor actually teach you how to think. Advisor teach you how things work, right? So
Yeah.
advisor is more about technical side, but mentor is actually teach you all this, how you should actually think about things,
Yeah.
hopefully.
That's a
Yeah.
very good
So
perspective.
I do feel like if you want to pick a research lab, if you don't know how to pick, first pick some skill sets that you want to have. Okay, so those things actually the things that you want to actually have. Those things is very easy to identify, right? So once you identify those things, then focus on, is the PI a good mentor? Okay, because you want to actually spend 5 years with this advisor, right? It's actually a long time. And I always
Yeah, it
tell my
is.
students, you are going to spend the best 5 years of your life, okay? Because you are actually most physically capable, right? And then your brain is actually fresh, right? So you're actually also mentally most capable.
For the most part, you're like
It's
peak
really the best
physiological.
5 years of your life, right?
Yeah.
You want to actually pick someone who can really shape you so that you can become the best you after 5 years. Yeah, so skill set, of course, is important. It doesn't really matter whether you go to industry or go to academia. Skill is skill, right? It's good, always good to have good skills, right? But mentor, mentor these things is actually even more important. But people never actually think about these things very carefully.
Right.
If you're good mentors, then you're going to enjoy these 5 years. If you don't, there's actually a very good possibility that you're going to suffer for 5 years. And then these 5 years, okay, after 5 years of proper training, the difference will be actually huge. Right? If you can actually enjoy the environment and you actually enjoy the things you're doing, then naturally you're going to actually be proactive to achieve things, right? And then you know what you're actually fighting for. Okay, what you're actually fighting for is actually make yourself a better you after 5 years, right? And all these things are cumulative, right? Only after you improve yourself little by little every day, okay, then after 5 years of time, then you can see how much you have transformed, right?
Right.
For those kids who doesn't have good mentors, okay, they will just stay at the same location after 5 years. Okay, so that's why I told my student, okay, you want to find a research lab, have good mentors. Okay, the lab need to actually fit into your personality. You want to make sure you have good enough time to talk to the professors. You want to have this
Yeah.
one-on-one interactions. You want to actually learn how these great scientists think about questions, right? So only after all these like multiple iterations through 5 years, then you have a chance to actually learn the logic behind all these labs.
Right.
Yeah. So that's always the things I tell my students. Okay. So you join for example, you join the chemistry department of University of Houston, right? The most important thing is actually pick the right research group for yourself, right? And then I always ask students, do you know how to pick a lab? Okay. No one
Good
actually has
question.
an idea, right? Because we never tell students how to pick a research lab. Yeah. So then I spend kind of like 1 hour explain, okay, what is the logic behind all these things? Yeah. So like I say, skill set of course is important, right? But the mentor is going to another super important factors. Eventually going to dictate who you will be after 5 years.
I'm gonna have to clip this and put this at orientation for our new students. This will be a good clip to bring in. Maybe I may have to bring you in as a special guest to talk about picking a advisor, or let's say a mentor or a research group. That'll be a good one.
Sure, I'm more than happy to talk about these things because I talk about this for I don't know how many years now. I mean, any group members in my lab, I at least spend
Yeah,
2 hours talking about these things to every individual one before they decide to join my lab.
that's a really good way to be because it definitely is not. It's definitely like not talked about enough for sure.
Hmm.
And students really need to know what they're getting. Let's say what they're getting into before joining a research group. Um,
Yeah.
but so back to so you're at A&M and you were doing what I thought was interesting is that you were looking at electronic and magnetization of
Yeah,
dynamism of cobalt substituted iron oxide nanocrystals. So one, I kind of just want to hear your general thoughts on like what you were doing. So what does that even mean? Like, what I'm
yeah.
kind of interested
So
in,
yeah,
why is there cobalt in your iron oxides? That's
yeah. So the things we're actually trying to do back to the time is actually see how light can actually interfere the magnetizations of nanoparticles.
wow.
Okay,
Okay.
because let's actually basically the main idea is actually very simple. We want to create this ultra fast switchable storage device.
Hmm.
Okay, and then basically use light as a source to actually magnetize or demagnetize your nanoparticles, right? So how fast that process is going to eventually dictate how fast your storage will be. Okay, so let's actually main applications. Yeah, so then we start to actually study, okay, what are the factors that can actually affect those relaxation speeds, right? So if I shine the light on my nanoparticle, how fast I can actually demagnetize it, right? And then that process, how can we actually influence those process, right? So then we realize that you can actually influence the process by changing the size of your nanoparticle, okay? Change the
Mm.
surfactants on the nanoparticle, or change the composition of the nanoparticle. That's why we actually dope some cobalt inside. Yeah, so it's really about like, okay, we're trying to, I guess you can summarize, you can think about this way, okay? My beginning stage of my PhD is trying to create a way that you can actually visualize all those uh, magnetization or demagnetization process. Okay, that's how we actually do this ultra-fast spectroscopy. Okay, methodology to quantify these time scales. Okay, and then in the very last 2 years, actually, okay, then let's test out, okay, what are the factors that can actually affect the process.
Mm.
Yeah, but in the end, the ultimate goal is actually want to figure out, okay, we know all these things. Okay, can we actually apply all the things we learned to the narrow storage devices, then give the best response time. Yeah, of course, I did not stay there long enough. I never see how these things actually eventually evolve to become magnetic storage devices. Yeah, and then I decided to actually change my focus afterwards.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, um, I've talked about this before. I mean, a lot of what chemists do are not necessarily application. I mean, they have application maybe
Mm-hmm.
purposes in the future, but for the most time, chemists and even really physicists, like we are just trying to understand a fundamental
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
understanding. And and let's say an engineer or someone will come in, or someone, they'll say, "Oh, here's an application for this particular thing." You're like, so, um,
Mm-hmm.
chemistry and or the more fundamental understanding. Um, what I'm curious about is how did you apply, let's say, light in the magnetic fields? Like how like let's say I'm trying to wrap my head around. So maybe you make or you buy these nanoparticles, these um
Mm-hmm. So we
you
make
and
all
then
these nanoparticles, and then
mhm,
they are actually paramagnetic, means actually if under the room temperature, the
right.
thermal energy is actually high enough, they will actually demagnetize all those things. So when we need to do these things, we need to actually first put a permanent magnet surrounding the solution. Okay, so that under the conditions, it will be magnetized. Then use light to actually hit on those nanoparticles, and then see how they actually demagnetize, and then see how it actually coming back in very fast time scales. Yeah, so yeah, I still remember how much time I spent to actually optimize that detection system. Yeah, because
Uh,
it's a lot of work to actually make those measurement work. Yeah, but
I was
I
gonna
think
say
during
how
the
much like how
hmm
much is lost, let's say, in the air, like the error of the instrument, like how much um well, first of all, what even instrument did you have to use? Like I don't even know. I'm not really familiar with a lot of PChem instruments. Um,
hmm
like so.
So are you familiar with the transient absorption?
Um,
So what it does
Transient.
is actually I guess the what would be the best way to describe it is actually we use ultra fast lasers. Okay, so basically
Okay.
a single laser pulse is couple femtoseconds. Yeah,
Yeah.
so you can actually shine your nanoparticle with that femtosecond pulse. Okay, so once the nanoparticle sees the light, they demagnetize. Okay, so those demagnetization will actually reflect by the absorbance.
I see.
Okay, so
Yep.
so you use that absorbance changes to actually find out how the magnetization changes accordingly. Yeah, and then you use this fast pulse to probe the changes. Okay, and then see how these things evolve as a function of
Hmm.
time. Then you're going to see this demagnetization occurs and then gradually recovering back. Yeah, and then from there, you can actually fit the curve to obtain this time scale for all these processes.
This might be a little bit difficult to explain, but what I'm trying to wrap my head around is using light to um, using light as a probe to understand magnetism, let's say within a compound. That's a bit um, wonky to me. Like using light, like what's the key relationship? Let's say, how do you get from like light to like magnetism? Like what's the when you shine light, I guess on a particle, you can then learn something about its magnetism, right? Am I understanding that correctly? Like
Yes. So it's actually
what's the key?
okay, I got you now. So you can think about this. Okay, so the light can consider as an electromagnetic wave,
Right, okay, yep,
right? So that's actually
yep.
nature of light, right? So right now think about you actually put something actually magnetized. Okay, so the magnetic field that you generate, okay, within your nanoparticles is going to interfere with the magnetic field of your light.
Oh, okay, okay. I
Okay,
see.
so from the interactions, they will actually give you some information about the magnetization of the nanoparticles. So it's really the light matter interaction in the magnetic domains that allow you to use light to probe the magnetizations of the nanoparticle. Does
I
that make
see.
sense
That
now?
makes sense. That does make
Mm-hmm.
sense. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's really awesome. Um, so from uh Texas A&M, first of all, how was did you have? I know you said you first 2 years you were working really hard, but did you have any like hobbies or activities like well, also let's say maybe in the latter years of your graduate school, like is there anything you kind of you were
Of course,
drawn to?
of course.
Yeah,
So back to that time, yeah, even though I work very hard, I also play quite hard too. Yeah, so
work
my
hard, play
philosophy,
harder. Work
yeah,
hard, play harder,
that's
as
my
I say.
philosophy is actually the time. Yeah, so I am very fortunate that I met my wife in
Oh
Texas
wow.
A&M. Yeah, so both of us like to actually go to both of us love natures. Okay,
Yeah.
so we actually went to a lot of national park in those 5 years. Yeah, so that's actually
Were
one thing we
there
do.
were there
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been to Austin a few times, and you kind of pass through A&M to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, it is there a lot of national parks that say within like kind of a driving distance, within like uh I know there's a lot of
No,
things in Austin,
not in
but no.
Texas. So
Very unfortunate. Yep.
yeah, so I actually only went to the when did I went to Big Bend? I forget. I think after I graduate, I actually went to the Big Bend National Park with my wife. Yeah,
Big Bend National Park?
yeah. So do you know
Oh,
the
that's
Big
the
Bend?
one. That's on the western coast of Texas, right?
Yeah. No.
Yep.
Big Bend is actually at the very kind of like at the very west side of Texas,
Yeah,
close to
yeah.
Mexico. Yeah. So that is actually
Yep.
the national park that we went after I graduated. But before we graduated, we actually went to a lot. So we went to the first one, of course, is will be the Yellowstone, right? Grand Canyon,
Gotta
and
go there.
then
Yep.
yeah, Arches, and then I feel Salt Lake
Go to
City,
Yosemite?
Rocky Mountains. Oh, we never actually went to Yosemite,
Okay.
and we also went to the one in Alaska, which is the Mountain Denali. I kind of forgot.
Yeah, Denali
So
is the I think is the largest peak in the United
yes,
States, I
yeah, it's
believe.
actually a lot of fun. So we actually spend no, we actually always plan that in the summer. So we always have
Mm,
like we actually gather with maybe 4, 5 friends. Yeah,
yeah,
then we fly there, we drove, and then we just play
that
there.
sounds really
So
fun.
it's really fun. Yeah, so that's actually one thing we did a lot. The other one is actually both us played badminton. Yeah, so during the
Great game.
weekend we always go to a rec centers, and then trying to keep
Great
ourselves
game.
fit because like in the lab you don't really do any exercise. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I feel like if I don't exercise, my brain doesn't work. I kind of
That's
get too
yeah.
rigid. I cannot think.
You
Yeah.
have to.
So
You have to exercise.
yeah.
A lot
So
of
those
a lot
are
of
the
graduate
two things
students
I
neglect
think.
that.
Yeah, those are the two things I think I did the most
Yeah.
while I was doing my PhD.
One last thing I want to ask you about before we move on to your postdoc is
Hmm.
that when your first impressions moving over to the United States, when you first came over to Texas, um, you know, I don't know if I talked to some international students now, like a lot of times they'll watch American movies to kind of get a sense of what's happening over here. So I don't know, did you do that? But also like when you first got to Texas, like how was your images, let's say, of like United States slash Texas actually come to like fruition when you actually got here? Like what was like your expectations versus when you actually got here?
Like I say, I was actually very naive. I don't really know. I don't know what to expect. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm fortunate that I actually entered the US in Texas in the beginning because in general, my feeling is actually Texans are actually slower,
Yeah.
okay, compared to the
It's
New
true.
Yorkers, of course. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So and then in general, I feel like Texan is actually very nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like in the beginning, we are not so good at, speaking English. Okay. Language is always a barrier in the very beginning,
Right.
right? So we always say things very, very slowly, and
Yeah.
then not everybody has the patience to wait for you, right? So that's why I feel like it's fortunate for me to kind of get into the US and then start at Texas. Yeah, so that I can kind of pick up all these things slowly, in College Station. Yeah, so
Hmm.
I do enjoy my time in the United States because I feel like I don't know much when I first enter US. Right. All the
Yeah.
things I know that I'm good at is actually those knowledges in chemistry. That's the only thing I know I'm good at because I put so much effort. Right. So I don't have any problem actually solving the homework for my graduate courses. That is not a
Right.
problem for me. The problem is actually how I actually fit into the environment and how I actually get used to the culture here. It actually
Right.
took me some years, quite a few years, and then kind of get into the situation that um, how the American or how the Texans handle things, right? And then, yeah, I feel like it's actually a great experience. After
Hmm.
my PhD, I do feel like I gradually actually fit into the culture here. Yeah, and then America is actually great that allow us to have this opportunity to really demonstrate. Okay, if you are really good at some things, we can see there's actually a possibility that you can actually be you can really do great in certain area. Yeah.
Right. So, um, kind of, what I'm kind of getting a feeling is you're always kind of interested in the fundamental understanding. So, what I'm curious about is, as a postdoc, then was a postdoc just a natural progression because a postdoc is, um, well, first of all, I mean, people that want to do postdocs, a lot of the times, maybe the job market's not right yet, so they go do a postdoc, or they do want to become a professor. So at this time, towards the end of graduate school, it was becoming a professor something you were really considering.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you know, Cornell, Ithaca, it's not New York City, but New York definitely has New York is definitely a much different lifestyle
Mm-hmm.
than Texas. So, kind of curious to hear about that transition from Texas to New York. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, but what were your initial interests, let's say, of doing a postdoc?
Yeah. So I guess I'm a professor who actually have very mixed background. Okay, so you can
Mm,
see from master to PhD is going from inorganic to physical chemistry. Okay, to be more precise, physical chemistry on materials,
yeah.
right? Because I'm doing all these nanoparticle things, right?
Yep.
But for
Yep.
my postdoc, I decided to actually change my focus again.
Which
Yeah,
is
the main
good though,
reason,
right? Isn't that typically? I mean, most postdocs you should be kind of without
yeah,
your area.
typically, yes, you should actually change the focus, research focus, right? But not too much.
No, yeah.
Okay, so I'm doing material, I'm doing physical chemistry. Yeah, in my postdoc stage, I decide to do biology.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so it's kind of like 90 degree turn.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
So it's very different, right? So, and the reason I do this is because I met my wife at Texas A&M. Right. She is actually a neurobiologist. Okay.
Oh
So,
man, neurobiology.
yeah.
Oh boy,
Yeah. So,
that is.
back to that time, I thought it's actually okay. I want to actually kind of work with my wife.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So, and then I realized that there's no way that she will be able to change her research focus from biology to like optics or spectroscopy. It's different. It's typical, right?
Yeah,
But I feel like maybe I can actually try to do more biology. Then maybe we can actually do some more research together in the future. Yeah. So then I decided to change my research focus. Okay. And the reason I get to do my postdoc in Ithaca is that when my PhD advisor giving his tenure talk at Cornell University, yeah, he kind of trying to help me to find a postdoc position over there. Yeah, so he talked to
mm,
my postdoc advisor, say, hey, this guy is actually looking for postdoc positions. Maybe interview him because my postdoc advisor want to build some instruments. Yeah, so I could be a good fit. Yeah. So when my PhD advisor come back, he just tell me, hey, Tai-Yen, do you want to go to Cornell doing a postdoc? I said, sure. Where should I go? Then he just forward all this information to me. Yeah, then I start to talk to my postdoc advisors. So we have this interview for 2 hours. Yeah, and then after a week, I got the offer letters. Then
that's really cool.
yeah, then
But
I
how
go
did that
to
go over though with your postdoc advisor? You're like, yeah, I have a background in let's say materials and optics, but you're biology. So how did that kind of work out?
no, he want to find someone
Oh, you wanted
who
someone with that.
is he want to find someone who is actually can do instrumentations because he want to actually
Gotcha.
build up some this so-called super resolution microscopy
Right.
in his lab. Yeah, and he know I can do it.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's why I got
That worked out
hired.
well then.
Yeah, so and then I told him that I want to change my research focus from the instrumentation to biology. Then
Mm.
that actually also fit into his program well. So boom. Then
Yeah, it worked out
after
well
I
then.
graduate, then I go to Cornell to start my another training over
Yeah.
there.
And what was your general so like you mentioned you kind of worked on biology, but so what did you work on at your time in at Cornell?
Yeah, so back to that time, we're trying to actually understand this transcription regulations in bacteria. Yeah,
Okay.
so we work on some transcription factors, how they actually, so that what transcription factor does is actually uh, when these proteins bind to the DNA, it will actually activate the production of some relevant proteins. Okay, so the binding is actually one thing. Unbinding is actually the opposite, right? So it's actually a activator. Once you unbind, it actually deactivates. Yeah.
Mm.
So we want to understand those process in real bacteria, which back to that time no one can do that yet. Yeah. So we actually first build a microscope, and then second we generate the the bacteria that have that transcription factors with some fluorescence protein label with it. Yeah,
Hmm.
so back to that time, I start to learn all this molecular biology technology and then the cell biology and then learning all this microscopy as well. Yeah,
I'm sure that took a while.
yeah. So it took me actually a very long time
Yeah.
finish my postdoc. Okay, but like I say, I have really good relationship with my postdoc advisor. I think he is actually the one who made me feel like could I could be a good professor.
Mm.
Yeah, because he had told me so much about his thought being a professor at Cornell University.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then I realized we actually have many thoughts that are actually very similar. So the frequency between me and my post advisor is actually very close. Yeah, and that's why I decide, okay, I really enjoyed time at Cornell. Yeah, so I want to stay there to actually until I actually get master with all this technology. Yeah, then I can actually move out. Yeah, and then because I enjoy the environment so much, I actually did a lot of like things. That's critically important to my personal life is that I got married on the
Hey,
first year when I did my postdoc over there. I have my two kids actually born during that period of time. Yeah, I stayed in the Issaca for 5.5 years. I
yeah,
would say that's still the best time I have ever. Okay, doing research and then improve myself.
right.
Yeah, and then make no achieve all these personal life goals like getting married, have two kids. Yeah, publish
That
my
sounds like an
first.
outstanding postdoc experience. I don't know.
It is, it is. That is
I
actually
mean,
experience totally changed my life, I would say, and
right.
also made me become a lot more mature. Think about how I should actually coach my student in the future.
Mm,
Yeah. So those 5.5 years are the most valuable years I have in the US, I would say.
that's awesome. That's super
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah.
Now I want to be a postdoc so I can get married and have children too. That's gonna be my goal. That's like, no, that's really awesome though. Uh, I mean, postdocs are really cool times I think because you don't have to pressure the PhD anymore. Like you have that. You've earned that. You really worked hard. So now you kind of like, you know, in some sense you can kind of
Oh, that's true or
live
not
wherever
though.
you want.
Because I also see some other postdoc actually suffer in his lab too. Okay. Again,
Mm,
it's really depending on like how you actually interact with your mentor, right?
yeah.
So the mentor, I feel like he is actually a mentor for me because that lab is, I feel like I've into the lab so well. They
Yeah.
have the things that I don't have, right? And then, but I have the skills they don't have. So I can actually
Mm,
help the lab, and then the professors actually help me to actually understand all this perspective in terms of PhD education, right? How to train the students, right? So while I was in Cornell, I actually create all this. I actually not just build up the microscope. I actually also create the softwares myself to let the lab to use. Okay, they're
wow.
still using the software I create um, right now. Okay, and then I create actually a short courses to train the students at Cornell. Okay, teach them how to use the microscope, teach them how to code. Yeah, so all these contributions, I think my advisor sees it, right? And then
Yeah.
he is actually willing to share his thought about, okay, he know I want to be a professor. And then he just tell me like his the real thought about the higher education system, right? He
Right.
teach me okay how I should handle things. Yeah, so I truly appreciate all his help because when I decide to actually looking for independent position, right? When I'm trying to do all this interview, he actually going through my slide one by one together with me. Yeah, and then he listened to my presentation. I don't know for how many times. Yeah, yeah. So every time I go out to give these job interviews, I always feel that he must tell his friend in law school and then try to help me out. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I really feel like I'm really fortunate to have a postdoc advisor like him.
Right.
Yeah,
It sounds like we need more advisors like him and yourself who are very thoughtful and caring. We need more
yeah. So
advisors
I
like
feel
that,
like the
mentors.
PhD is already hard enough.
Yeah.
We need some good advisors to help students to move forward.
Yeah.
Right. So that become
Yeah.
actually my belief. Okay, once I become a PhD advisor, okay, I do spend a lot of time talk to my students. Okay, teach them how to think. Yeah, and then I also tell them, okay, not everyone need to be a professor, right?
Right.
So you
That's true.
just need to pick up the one that fits you the best. And
Yeah.
everybody's different. So you need to know what you are good at, right? And then use that as your strength to maximize the benefit you can get through the course of your life.
Right. So now, could probably a good transition to, what you do now here at Houston. So you're definitely a professor here,
Yeah.
for sure. And
Mhm.
you also know you're a teacher here, but I kind of first I definitely want to start with like the research because I think that is really really fascinating stuff. You do a lot of neuronal copper homeostasis,
Mm-hmm.
protein oligomers, and you take a look at protein oligomers and neurodegenerative diseases, but also photo-enhanced reactivity of plasmonic arrays. And quite frankly, I don't know what any of that stuff means. I got to be
Mm-hmm.
honest with you, but that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. That's okay. That's why you're here.
Yeah.
It just sounds really cool. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna kind of let you take the floor here a little bit. Maybe we'll take a little dive into each section of your research and what maybe students could expect to if you're a student in the Professor Tai-Yen Chen's lab.
Yeah, of course. So my research lab is actually somewhat related to my wife's expertise.
Yeah.
Okay. So remember I tell you that she is actually a neurobiologist. So when I actually prepare for all these job interviews, okay, she is actually the one who actually contribute quite a bit. Yeah. So when I was in the my postdoc advisor's lab, right, I actually look into all this, how the bacteria modulate all these metals. Okay, so how to actually keep the metal at the proper concentration.
Mm.
So in back to 2016, there is actually a wave that multiple pharmaceutical companies that give up their Alzheimer's disease drug. Okay, so back to that time, what people actually think about the cause of Alzheimer's disease is that we form this so-called A beta plaque. Okay, basically it's just a protein aggregation. Okay, so people have that hypothesis for, I don't know, 20 or so years or slightly longer. Okay, so all these pharmaceutical companies, they actually spend a lot of money trying to actually find a drug that can actually disassemble those plaque so that we can actually stop this disease. But in 2016, when they actually indeed create those drugs, they can effectively dissociate those plaque. Okay, but when applied to the patient actually get worse. The symptoms get worse. The patient actually die earlier.
Oh wow.
So what it implies actually they may not be actually the cause. Okay, they probably is actually some phenotype you are going to see when you actually have all this neurodegenerative disease. Okay, so people actually look more carefully into, okay, so what caused all those aggregations? Okay, one thing that caught my eye is actually the those plaque has very high concentration of heavy metals like copper, zinc, iron. Okay, copper is actually the one I'm most interested in because copper is actually highly regulated. Okay,
Mm.
so that's the time I start to think, okay, then how does neuron regulate copper? Okay, so that is actually the beginning of my research program. I want to know how the thing is actually regulated. Right. Apparently, it's actually misregulated so that it end up at plaque. Okay, so how all this process happens, right? So it's actually unknown back to the time. Yeah, so that's how we create this research program. Okay, I want to actually create some human neuron cells and study how these proteins that is responsible for all this copper homeostasis, copper regulation works, right? So we need to actually create a healthy human neurons. We also need to create a neuron with Alzheimer's disease, right? Then you can compare the two, then see how these two actually regulate copper differently. Then we
Mm.
may be able to actually provide some insights how this misregulation of coppers in the end induce all this neuron degenerate disease. Yeah, so that's actually why we want to study this copper homeostasis in human neuron cells. Yeah.
I think it's really cool is I feel like a lot of people might not think that copper is well, let's say biologically relevant. Like I mean, I didn't even really know that like let's say copper is in the body. I didn't even know that. Like I know iron is, right, but copper I didn't even know about. That's really cool.
Yeah,
Um,
so I guess right now these things getting more and more popular because the misregulation of copper is also tied to many other things. For example,
mm,
copper is actually a redox metal. So misregulation of copper is going to associate with the misregulated antioxidant defense inside the cell. Okay, and the misregulated antioxidant defense is also a feature that commonly observed in the neurodegenerative disease. Okay, and then misregulation of copper is also tied to the misregulation of uh, endocytosis the membrane trafficking mechanism too. Yeah, so there are actually multiple phenotype show up in all this neurodegenerative disease. Is also somewhat tied to this copper misregulation. Yeah, so in our lab, we're trying to actually provide more fundamental understandings about how the neuron is really maintain the proper copper concentrations. Yeah.
I guess something that I find a little bit surprising that you're saying is I didn't know. Like I would have thought that people would have had a good understanding of that. Like I find it. I think it's interesting that like let's say the medical community doesn't already know how copper is regulated. I guess, but I guess that's a gap in
Yeah.
the field, I suppose.
So copper things is okay. Many layers. I think we need to actually make it more clear. First, neuron is actually a very different type of cells. Okay, so people actually understand copper homeostasis in, for example, mammalian cell. Okay,
Okay.
but those cells are kind of like immortal cells. Okay, or liver cells. Okay, but it's not in neuron cells. In neuron
I
cells,
see.
first, it's not easy to actually gain the human neuron cells directly. Okay, and then you want to actually also want to see all these copper binding proteins individually inside cell is also challenging. Okay, so in our lab, we actually combine multiple different technologies. Okay, one is actually we do this imaging, right? So the other one is actually we use this CRISPR-Cas9 to engineer our human stem cell, which can allow us to have this healthy versus disease neural models. These things is actually not there in the past. Okay, we actually work with some collaborators to actually generate all these things. Yeah, so we are actually in a unique position that we are the pretty much the only one lab who put everything together and allow to actually to probe this problem very recently. Yeah, so many processes are actually cell type dependent, right? So since we are actually the first one who put all the things in the more physiological relevant conditions, then I guess whatever finding we have will eventually provide more valuable insight to how neuron is actually modulate the copper status in the cell. Yeah.
Okay.
So from there, I think we can actually provide some fundamental information to help people to really get to know what's going on for the Alzheimer's disease. And then, believe it or not, people have studied Alzheimer's disease for 100 years. 100 years. We still don't know what is the cause of Alzheimer's disease. There's still no good hypothesis for that. Yeah, that is why when we start to propose all the things, people start to feel interesting because the A beta plaque hypothesis nowadays has been questioned by many people. Okay, I guess there are more and more people think that they probably is not the cause, but a downstream result. Okay, so I think we need to actually probe other possibilities. So eventually we can actually have a good understanding what is really the cause of all this neurodegenerative disease.
So a question I have then is how, what are the instruments and what are the assays that you have to use to probe, let's say, copper in like neuron type cells? Because, and how does that contrast to, let's say, probing copper in like you said, mammalian cells or like, let's say, liver cells, the blood? Like, how does that, and how is it different than those types of
So
probing?
neuron cell is actually very special cells because they are the way they communicate with each other is actually through the electronic signals, right? And then they form all these things called the synapse. And then in the between synapse, there's actually a lot of like neuron transmitters. Copper is actually one of the very important neurotransmitter. Yeah, and
Makes
then copper
sense.
is also copper is also very interesting things because it is actually a cofactor for many proteins. What it means is actually those proteins will only be functional once they have copper. Okay, so somehow copper is actually playing in all these important process for neuron communications. Yeah, but what is the fundamental knowledge is basically unknown. So many things is actually unexplored. Okay, Yeah, so people actually spend a lot of time working on those membrane cells, but those are not neuron cells. So once you actually change the cell type, it's very likely their behave is going to change significantly.
I see.
Yeah. So you need to actually really have proper cellular models, right? So the most relevant one will be actually human neurons. Right. So that's why we actually go to the medical center trying to find the collaborators who can really generate all those neuron models on the dish. Okay. So we learn all those technologies and then we label the copper binding proteins. Copper by itself, okay, is redox active. So
Mm.
at any given time, there's actually no free copper in the cell. It's going to always be bound by some proteins, right? So to actually understand the control of copper, then we actually need to understand those copper binding proteins behaviors. So what we really do is actually we label those copper binding proteins and use fluorescence method, use imaging method to see how they actually behave inside the cells. And we need to do all the things inside the cell so that everything will be actually in its natural context, right? So you cannot actually do the things in the purified proteins because they don't have the environment anymore. But the
Hmm.
environment is definitely actually a very important factor in all these studies. So you need to actually really see those things in situ, right? Using your microscope. Yeah, so we are the lab who actually can build the microscope. We are the lab who can actually label the protein of our interest. We are the lab who can actually create the things into human neuron cell lines, right? So with all of this integrated, then we'll be able to actually provide more insight to those questions that we want to actually address.
So a couple questions on that then. So unlike let's say other cells in the body, and for the
Mhm.
neurons type cells, there's not like a depository of like copper ions. Copper is always it's always bound to let's say metalloproteins. So
Mhm.
like there's no depository in our brain where it's just holding copper ions waiting to
So
be
those
utilized by other
proteins,
parts.
so these metalloproteins, okay, especially copper binding proteins, they have actually different families, and they actually have these so-called uptakers, okay, or the effluxers. One is actually
Hmm.
bring the copper in, one bring the copper out. And they have chaperones, which bring the copper to different locations inside the cells as needed. Yeah, and then all these things is actually dynamic processes. Yeah, so that means actually if you treat your neuron with some stimuli, for example, you put in high oxidative stress, you put in some coppers, okay, copper stress, okay, or you put in some electronic signals, those protein will actually change its locations accordingly. Yeah. So how these things are correlated with each other, we will be actually the only one lab who can actually provide the answer now.
What I how do you then a question is are you imaging are you trying to okay, to monitor, let's say, copper throughout these neurons, are you monitoring the copper itself or the proteins it's bounded to? Like, could you somehow monitor, let's say, copper 1, copper 2, copper 3? Like, mostly probably copper 1, copper 2, or do you have to monitor the proteins?
Yeah, people are trying to actually monitor behavior of copper directly using some copper sensors
Okay.
or using the X-ray fluorescence. Okay. But copper is actually low in concentration inside the cell. Okay.
Mm,
So using the X-ray fluorescence, you don't get good enough SN ratio.
okay.
Okay. And for those copper binding sensors, the fundamental principle is actually a competition. Okay, so the sensor is going to have a defined copper binding affinity. Therefore, it's going to compete with those proteins with similar binding affinity, right? But by itself doesn't really actually tells you how this copper is going to evolve, right? And then it's not designed in a way it can easily differentiate copper 1 or copper 2. Okay, so our approach is actually we are not actually looking at copper directly. Rather, we look at the regulation of these copper binding proteins because we believe that these proteins are machines, right? They are the one who is responsible to deliver the copper to the right time.
Hmm.
So by understanding all these copper binding protein behaviors, we have actually a better understanding how the copper is actually regulated inside the cell. Yeah, so that will be actually the fundamental thinkings that we have in the lab.
And so far, I mean, I don't know how easy it'll be to explain this, but so far, in your research, have you been able to understand the mechanisms of copper? Have you do you have a kind of a good sense of what's happening, let's say, in these systems
So
so
we're
far,
actually
or?
working on a very small part of all these big pictures. Okay, so
Sure,
I'm talking
sure.
about a very big pictures. There's actually so many different things is happening now.
I can
So
imagine.
right now, I think the lab have pushed the understanding about this copper uptake process.
Okay.
Okay, how the neuron actually uh can control this copper uptake process uh using imaging approach. So previously, the protein that can uptake copper into cell is a protein called CTR1. Okay,
Okay.
the name doesn't matter that much, but important thing is actually a stable trimer. That means actually once they produce these proteins, okay, they need to actually form a trimer. And when they form these trimers, they have this forming this channel in between that allow the copper to go in to the cell. In the past, people always think that is actually the stable form of the CTR1, and that is actually a form that allow the copper to go in, right? So in our lab, we actually realized another thing is actually people previous told us that when the cell under high copper stress, you want to minimize this copper intake, right?
Hmm.
So what they say is actually the cell is going to endocytose those transporters, bring them into the cell so they can minimize the copper uptake. Okay. But we think that it doesn't make too much sense because the endocytosis process is actually relatively slow. Okay. But we know the cell can actually have really fast adjustment of copper. The cell can actually stop the copper uptake very quickly.
Hmm.
Okay. So what could be actually the molecular mechanism for that? So our recent finding is that we realized that this trimer, what they do is actually when you're under high copper stress, before the endocytose, they can just break apart because the channel is actually formed by putting three units together. Okay, but right now, the things we found is actually they can also break apart to minimize those copper uptake directly before they got endocytosed into the intracellular environment. So we think that's actually a great findings and then provide some molecular understanding about how these processes can be controlled, right? So right now our lab is actually trying to actually deep in a little bit more, okay? What is actually the key elements inside the proteins that sense all these copper changes, right? How do they actually know then to actually break apart? So kind of trying to move into those directions even more, yeah, with more like molecular biology control experiments. Yeah.
Yeah. As we begin to wrap up here, I want to touch on just your teaching a little bit and about your, let's say, pedagogical philosophy a little bit as we wrap up here. So, well, one is, what courses do you teach here at Houston? Mm.
So the most recent courses I taught is actually the Gen Chem 2. It's like 300 kids general chemistry 2 courses. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's kind of a service course, but um Prof is actually I guess this semester is actually the most interesting semester I enjoyed the most actually since I joined University of Houston. So the things I did differently this semester is actually I kind of flipped the class completely.
Mm.
So I record all these contents and post them to YouTube, and then I ask students to actually watch the video before they actually come to the class in person.
Yeah.
So
And have you seen success with that?
I think it's actually fun, and then I feel like of course you always have some students that don't like this way of teaching, but majority of them things actually enjoy this new way of teaching because when they come to the classroom, we actually work through many questions together, right?
Mm.
So the reason I do that is because I want to teach students, okay, when you read a questions, when you encounter a problem, okay, how you can actually approach it. I always tell them, okay, when you read the questions, okay, looking for the keywords, okay, so what is this actually trying to ask you, right? So I teach them how I actually approach the questions. Yeah, and then from there, then I start to actually review the material, the lecture note. Okay, so tell them, okay, from here you can actually see, okay, how is actually associated content you have learned, right? And then from there you will know, okay, how to think through these processes. Yeah. And then one thing I did a lot is actually I'm not just doing all these things by myself. Okay. I create something called a spinning wheel where the wheel doesn't have the student's name on it. So I just spin it and then randomly pick up one student and ask them come up to the stage and then work through all these things together with me. Yeah, and I found that one is actually very interesting, even though some students say it's actually stressful. But most of them, they can't enjoy the process because they have a chance to actually work with me, right? And then
Yeah.
I think that's actually great too because the student actually that is not presenting, okay, and they can see how other students think through this process, okay, and then it's very easy to see why students will think incorrectly too. Yeah, so I think having those experience in the class let the students see, okay, what is difference about between professors thinking and the students thinking, right?
Yeah.
So which way is actually more efficient? Which way actually make more sense? Yeah, so by those contrasts, I feel like we provide students another way to see more clearly, okay, what would be actually a better way to think through a problem. Yeah, so and then we repeat this process so many times, right? So the student actually kind of get used to when they encounter a problem, they can gradually to decipher the problem independently. And then they also know how they can actually associate a question to the literature materials from the videos. Yeah,
Yeah.
so and then all these interactions, I feel like actually also make the student can more concentrated on the materials, right? When they actually come to the lectures, they are not just pretend that they are there. They will actually actively actually engage with me and then trying to actually learn things throughout the process. Yeah. And then I got feedbacks from students all the time. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I feel like they really like if the professor trying to make the class fun, they will actually respond to you, right?
Mm.
And then they will start to actually believe in you that this will be actually effective way help them to improve their study. And then I also tell them a lot is that I do all these things is because I want to demonstrate to the student, okay, when you read through your textbook, can you actually summarize or condense your knowledge into something like my lecture note? Because
Mm.
I show them, okay, so my lecture note is actually after I condense all the materials. For every chapter, I only have one sheet hang out, okay?
That's all
And
I
then
really need.
I only have the most important things, okay? And then I also summarize all these equations that I feel like is important, right? I show them, okay, how you can actually going from reading to summarize your knowledge, condense it into a single sheet, which I think I tell them, okay, this process is even more important than whatever grade you get from this course.
Mhm.
Because, like I say, I emphasize those fundamental framework more than anything else because I feel like those knowledges, if you learn it, you use it for good,
Right.
right? Yeah. So whatever you learn in the courses, you probably will forget about it after a semester if that is actually something you're going to use daily, right?
Well,
So
especially a lot of students who aren't even like people who are taking Gen Chem too aren't even
there you
like a lot of
go,
them aren't even like chem majors,
a
right?
major, right? So I tell them, okay, so you should really learn these skills, okay, because all
Right.
these things, once you learn it, you won't forget about it,
Yeah.
right? So, and then if you make it really good, if you are really good at all the things, it make your life also easier too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I always tell them okay, on the first day of my lectures, I tell them that, okay, even though I'm a chemistry professor, I don't think this course is that important to you. Okay. The important thing is actually I want to learn how I handle the materials, how I actually condense all the things in your textbook into this simple sheet. right? How you actually can condense your knowledge into a simple language that you can actually memorize. Yeah. So I think many of the students actually get actually eventually learn all these things. Yeah. And then the end result I got is actually they are doing actually great for their courses. And then they enjoy a lot about my courses too. Yeah. Most impressive things I got this semester is that I have 300 kids. And then at the end of semester, they need to actually submit all these evaluations, the course evaluations, right?
Yeah.
Typically, I think the general chemistry's professors, they got like, probably 30% of response. Yeah. I got a record high this year. I got 90% of the students respond to my evaluations.
Wow. 90%.
It's amazing, right? 200 something
Yeah.
kids. Yeah. So
Right.
so they actually really made me feel that I'm very glad that my effort has been seen by the students, and then they do respond to me in a way that they push me forward. I feel like okay, it made me feel like being a professor is actually very rewarding.
Right.
So I put in all these efforts. I didn't actually expect that many people will actually respond to me. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but in the end, it's 90% of the kids. Yeah, so I feel it's actually
That
so cool. Yeah, so
that's really cool
really,
because yeah, you were kind of upfront in the beginning, like, I mean, yeah, I mean, let's just call it as it is. I mean, most students, and let's say in a 300 student lecture, how many of the students actually really need Gen Chem 2? I mean,
no, not that many.
not that many. Most students that are taking Gen Chem 2, a lot of them are going to be your, PTs, or they're going to medical school, or, it's
Yeah.
kind of their trajectory. They don't need Gen Chem 2, but you bring up a really cool point that I never really thought about is like, it's not about the content itself, but how you learn and how can you actually take, let's say, a chapter's worth of materials and condense it into, a page.
Yeah.
And that sort of transparency, I think, goes a long way, I think, and that's really interesting. Um,
hmm
what I'm
Yeah.
curious about is how if you do the spin wheel and you kind of work through a problem together in front of a 200-person lecture hall, how did that go over with the first few students? I mean, was it
They
kind
are
of positive?
scared. They
Yeah, of
are
course.
scared in the beginning, right? But um, I'm a very like supportive professors. Yeah. If
Mm-hmm.
I actually call you up, if you actually are brave enough to come up, I will let you. I will actually help you throughout the whole process.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and then many students actually realize that. Yeah. Actually, in the end of the semester, there actually many students they volunteer to come up. Yeah. So
Hey.
I think that's always those are a very rewarding side to me, right? I know that they actually trust me, and then they want to actually do the things together with me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, which totally make my day. Every time I finish the teachings and I see all the response, I be like, yeah, this is something I can really enjoy for my
That's
career.
really awesome. Well, Professor Chen, I want to thank you so much for coming on the episode today. It was a pleasant uh, conversation with you, and
Yeah.
I'm really excited. Well, on hopefully, that you have continued success with your professorship, both as a teacher and obviously as a mentor. But I also hope, with your research, I'm really excited to see over the next
Yeah.
few years what you learn about, let's say, copper homeostasis and regulation. I think it's really cool.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Aiden. Thank you for the invitation, though. It's actually a very interesting experience for me. Yeah. Never actually be on a podcast. This is actually my first time, and then
Yeah,
it is actually much enjoyable than I thought. I thought it would be
yeah,
actually like I need to worry about a lot of things, but it's kind of like it's fun. It's actually a lot of fun.
yeah. I try to be real and try to zero cost consumer to listeners. I mean, I think there's so much cool research and so much cool like teaching, let's say pedagogy out there that really deserves to shine some light on that. And I really don't, professors are people too. It's just
Yes,
like
we
what,
are. We are. Yeah, and then my personal belief is actually we should actually make students' life easier. Yeah,
yeah,
so learning is hard, right? So I got so many help from others. Now it's actually time for us to return it back.
yeah. It's time for you to get back. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.